Today at Speedy's Garage we're prepping the Challenger for the 6.0 forged engine and supercharger. And the first part of that's going to be installing some performance gauges. There's an Air Force interceptor, an LC1 wideband that will read my air-fuel ratio and then feed it to that gauge there. I'm going to do an Autometer C2 boost gauge. It's a mechanical boost gauge. It was a little bit less expensive and I used one on the 4Runner and it worked great. We're going to house those gauges in a razor's edge dual gauge pod that goes on the pillar. It's actually a factory A-pillar cover that Razor's Edge has grafted on a couple of gauge pods. You can see on the back side it's all factory. They just made the holes for the wires to pass through and they put on fiberglass pods, so that means it'll fit just like factory. And then they cover it in a material that looks very similar to the headliner. To isolate all the electrical components from the stock electrical system, I'm using a Circuit Boss. It's the model that is weatherproof and has 3 circuits on it that are ignition hot, so that'll work out great for this procedure. You'll need some zip ties, some heat shrink, wiring, soldering iron, wire cutters, solder, wire strippers, a couple of dash tools. And I like everything to look factory, so I'll be hiding the wire in corrugated nylon tubing. And I'm going to use the nylon in the engine bay. It's good to about 300 degrees, so it'll be more than enough. You can always tell the high heat stuff because it has a gray stripe on it. And I got 1/4 inch and 3/8 for the different size wires that I'm going to use. Anytime you're running wiring, you need to have a plan of what you're going to do so that you don't get in there and make a mess of everything. So I did a wiring diagram in Visio, and this is exactly how I wire it up in the car. I've got the LC1 wideband, I've got the wire colors correct, the grounds and everything noted, the Autometer dimmer. I don't know if I mentioned that before, but basically the Autometer gauges, for instance this C2 gauge, they're lit with LEDs and they're really bright. When I used them in the 4Runner, I noticed they were really distracting actually, and since they're LED illuminated, you can't just hook them up to your factory dimmer. LEDs are either on or off. There is no bright or dim, so you have to dim them with what's called pulse width modulation, which means it basically turns the LEDs on and off at a very high rate, which your eye perceives as being dimmer. So Autometer has a pulse width modulation device that connects up to their gauges so that you can dim them along with the factory dash illumination. So what I'll do is put this in the car, connect that gauge to it, and then I'll get it at the same illumination as the factory gauges. The Air Force interceptor, you can't use that on it. It has a circuit board built in that has 3 brightness settings, and I tested it out and it looked like, probably setting 1 or 2 will be just fine. So back to the wiring diagram. There's our Circuit Boss. Got it labeled with the proper fuses. All the wiring colors are labeled. There's the 2 gauges. And I'll just follow this when I put the wiring in. It really shouldn't be too big of a deal. On the 6-speed Challengers, there's a grommet that fits in the firewall right on the driver's side. I've already pulled it out, but that's what it looks like. And that's where I plan to run the wiring through to get it to the inside of the car. I'll probably, drill a hole or something in that so that I can run my corrugated wire wrap through this and it'll be protected. So that's a good spot. I don't know if the automatics have that same opening or not, but that's where I'm going to use it on the 6-speed car. When you're doing wiring, you got to try to follow where the factory ran theirs. There's a reason they put it where they did, so I'll just run it along the back of the engine. And then I think I'm going to mount the Circuit Boss right here in this area, close to the stock fuse box. That way the fuses are all together and it will actually look like a factory part. It'll just look like an additional fuse location. Now I won't be able to film every little bit. Wiring's a little bit tedious and you have to do a lot of, leaning underneath the dash and everything else, but I'll try to hit the high points in this video. Okay, one of the first things I need to do is I had to make this little bracket. This is just 1/2 inch aluminum bar stock that I picked up at Lowe's or Home Depot. The way it fits is they go on the back of your gauges like that, and then this is what holds your gauge in place. The bracket that came with the gauge is kind of a large black plastic bracket. Here it is. And you can't fit this inside the Razor's Edge pod. So I made this one. Took about 15 minutes, not very hard. Okay, at this point, I've got the Circuit Boss circuit breaker installed. I mounted it on the passenger side front fender so that it's hidden by the integrated power module that's in the engine bay from the factory. The Circuit Boss itself is also mounted on the fender. That made the most sense to me because it's right next to the factory fuse box or integrated power module, however you want to call it. So all the fuses in this part of the car are right there together. Of course, there's another fuse box in the trunk, but I didn't want to run wires all the way from back there when this was so convenient. So basically, it's one wire. You can see it. I've already got the high temp black corrugated wire loom over the top of it, and it's connected to the positive 12 volt bolt right there, and that's where everything draws its power from. It's got a relay that's activated by the pink wire, and that pink wire will run to this 15 amp fuse right here. And actually, if you look in the cover, that fuse is number 5. And if you go to the description, it says that's diesel PCM. Well, of course, there's no diesel computer in this car, so that fuse is just a blank fuse that's in the car. It does get switched 12 volt power, meaning it's only powered when the car is started. And that's when I want the Circuit Boss to get its power. So when I start the car, this will be energized. It'll energize the relay, and then the 3 circuits will also get 12 volts. And they'll power any accessories that I have connected to them. The yellow wire I've got coiled up right here, that's going to actually power the water pump for the Magnuson supercharger, or actually it'll activate the relay to power the water pump. I'm going to use the blue wire right here, and that'll run into the cab of the car through the hole in the firewall that I showed you earlier, and that'll be used to power all the gauges. And then I've got a third circuit, which is a purple wire, and that's just going to be an extra. I may use it somewhere down the road to power a GPS or something like that. So I'll just extend it into the cab and then coil it up behind the dash somewhere and tuck it away. And as you can see, when you shut the fuse box, of course, pretend this yellow coil wire isn't here. You can't even really tell it's not a factory piece. I mean, that's always the point when I do something on the car. I want it to look factory, and I think that Circuit Boss fits the bill. So next I need to extend the blue wire from the Circuit Boss into the cab of the car. So what I've done is stripped off about a ½ inch of the wire coating. You can do this with butt connectors and connect the 2 pieces of wire together that way. However, I'm going to solder mine. With electronics in particular, I always like to solder the joints so that you know they're secure. If you do decide to use butt connectors, do not use this kind. These are, for just regular old power or something like that, or ground. You don't want to use these kind on any kind of electronics. Use the heat shrink type. These you crimp and then use a hairdryer or heat gun or cigarette lighter, and this will shrink and seal the connection. So make sure you use those. You also, when you solder, you're going to want to have some heat shrink tubing on hand to cover the joint so that it's protected. And I'm just going to use regular old rosin core solder from Radio Shack, and just an inexpensive soldering gun, which I've got heating up over here. I went ahead and took some sandpaper and just scuffed up the tip so that it's nice and clean and ready to go.